Thank you for giving us this opportunity. So my first question, now you're at the end of the first 4-year mandate of the Trovdo government. If you want to tell us about one achievement that you're proud of, that you have achieved in the past 4 years, whether as a member of parliament or as the government of Prime Minister Trovdo overall, what would that be?
I think there are two probably. The first would be what I've done personally, and then what the government has done to make lives better in Don Valley West. This is my second time as a member of parliament in Don Valley West, and I was in opposition, now I'm in government. You get to do a few different things when you're in government. In this term, I took advantage of the fact that the Prime Minister increased funding for Canada Summer Jobs radically. We increased the funding by about over 50% a year for the last 4 years, and that has put close to $1 million a year into Don Valley West in terms of Canada Summer Jobs. So making sure that young people, students and young adults get funding to both learn the skills and also get some experience has been important to me. But what I did was establish a jobs fair. And so that brings about 300 young people from Thornton Park into a setting with about 70 employers they're looking for talent, and young people are looking for jobs. And so over the last 3 years, this has grown. And it's actually become a model for other MPs across the country. So I hosted in Thornton Park. That's an area of newcomers. It's an area where a lot of the kids don't have parents who have networks and the ability to help their kids get summer jobs. So we bring not-for-profits, charities, small businesses together, and they promote themselves. And there are a lot of marriages made in that place where kids get experience, they get money to go back to school, they get experience, and a lot of our local organizations get really tremendous summer employees. So that's a project that I've been working on, and I will continue to do that. That helps young people, but the program I think I'm most proud of that the federal government has done has been the Canada Child Benefit. And that has remarkably changed lives in this riding in Thornton Park. That gives tax-free money to families to help their children, to pay their rent, to provide opportunities and do that. And close to $60 million a year is flowing into Don Valley West for the Canada Child Benefit, which is making a real difference.
Now, about economy, you mentioned the tax benefit, but about the economy, Justin Trudeau ran on a platform in 2015 which was focused mainly on middle class. And now, 4 years after, do you think the government achieved the goals that it had, which was focused on middle class? If you look at some of the indicators, whether with respect to income inequality or housing affordability, there are still problems. Major problems. So do you think the government has achieved what it promised in 2015 with respect to economy and especially the middle class?
I think we've actually done a little bit better than we planned. And we won't take credit for everything because there is a buoyant world economy right now. However, in these last 4 years, Canadians have created over 1 million jobs. And we don't say the government's created those because I don't think governments really create all those jobs, but we create the environment by which those jobs have been created. That's more jobs than Mr. Harper created in his whole almost a decade in office. 1 million jobs, 1 million people working. The unemployment rate is at the lowest level in 45 years. Since they started keeping statistics about employment, our unemployment rate is the lowest. And those are good jobs that have been created. We see that in Toronto. It's easy to see that the city's working. There's construction going on everywhere. Some of those are infrastructure jobs. Some of those are housing starts, condominiums, office buildings. The whole place is alive, and I think that we're part of that. In terms of the middle class and those working hard to join it, through the Canada Child Benefit as well as other programs, almost 900,000 Canadians have been lifted out of poverty. That includes 300,000 kids. I'm extremely proud of that, and that's building the middle class. So if you build the middle class, they in turn create jobs, because as they get more income, they spend it, and the whole economy does better. And so those who are in the upper middle class actually do well as well. And so I think we're doing that. Are we finished? No. There are still too many people in poverty. We're just at the start of a national housing strategy, and there's two parts of that housing strategy. One is around affordable housing, and that is a multi-billion-dollar project to repair existing affordable housing, co-ops and community housing, as well as build new affordable housing. But the other part of that is housing affordability. And I think that's what affects a lot of people in Toronto, is that it's a supply and demand market. Toronto's a great place to live. People want to live here, and housing supply is still not big enough. So we're trying to find a way to keep a slight damper on housing prices through a stress test on getting a mortgage. It's something that the Conservatives would let go, but we're actually trying to keep our eye on the market. We're also willing to take an equity share in someone's first home. So if someone is wanting to buy that first condominium and it costs $600,000 or $700,000, we'll take a 5% ownership equity investment in that home, and it's actually a win-win again, because the mortgage payments are dropped for the young or even a middle-aged homeowner, first-time home buyer, and if the price goes up, the public will do well as well, because we have that 5% stake. We're not done yet. If we compare ourselves to the rest of the world, Canada is an amazing place to live. Canada is a place where we value equity, where we're trying to lift people out of poverty, where we're trying to welcome newcomers. Am I satisfied that we're finished? Not at all. But I don't want to turn the clock back to the Harper era. I want to choose forward and keep moving to make sure that we continue to do what we're doing. You can't change everything in 4 years, but you can make a good start at it.
The last portfolio that you were involved with was foreign policy. Now, many believe that the government of Prime Minister Trudeau faced an uphill kind of battle in the foreign policy file. 4 years ago, Justin Trudeau, when he was a candidate, he promised that he will change the way that Canada is presented on the world stage. He promised constructive engagement with the world versus the policies that Harper was implementing during his time. He promised re-engagement with Iran. That did not happen. Now that we look at Canada's foreign policy, you see that Canada has tensions in its relationships with different countries, including China. With Iran, the government was not able to achieve its promise of re-engagement. In the same region with Saudi Arabia, there are tensions in that relationship as well, while Canada is still selling billions worth of weapons to Saudi Arabia. So do you think that the government had a positive and successful performance in the foreign policy side?
I think we've made steps in that way. I begin by saying that in this parliament for 4 years, I've had a couple of really good jobs. I've really enjoyed being the chair of the Public Safety and National Security Committee. I chaired the Immigration Committee, and most recently was appointed as Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs. I'm not young, not old either, but I'm not young. But in all the jobs that I've had in my whole life, being the Parliamentary Secretary and working with Chrystia Freeland as the Minister of Foreign Affairs is probably the best job I've ever had. I watch her on the world stage, and I watch the way the Prime Minister is respected on the world stage, and I do my small part in that, in trying to represent Canada at a variety of international meetings and in diplomatic situations. And I would still say I'm learning, but I'm learning from some pretty amazing individuals, including the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Chrystia Freeland. If you turn back the clock to 4 years ago, when we won that last election, Canada had lost in its bid to get a seat at the UN Security Council. We had decreased foreign aid in some critical places. We had tied foreign aid to our economic policy only in Canada. We had lost our humanitarian edge, and we didn't have a focus for foreign aid, and we didn't have a core of what we were doing in our foreign policy. And both with Stéphane Dion, the First Minister, and now with Chrystia Freeland, we talk regularly about an international rules-based order and following the rule of law. We talk about human rights, and we talk about working multilaterally and building multilateral relationships. Those sort of three core principles of international rules-based order, human rights, and working multilaterally are what we're doing. And I think we're respected for that. On the development side, we've had a focus on women and girls, education, healthcare, and finding a niche in that world where we can make concrete differences. Right now, the Conservative Party said they're going to, if elected, roll back 25% of our foreign aid. It's wrong. If anything, we should be increasing it. We need to show the world that Canada, as a wealthy country, cares. And it's not only good humanitarian aid, it's not only good morally, it's good economically. We create markets for middle-class people around the world, and also we improve security. If you've got horrendous poverty in a country, you're going to have security issues, so you try to do that. So that's one thing we're doing. You'll remember that after we've been in office for a year, the Americans had their election, and they elected a new president, Donald Trump. And let's just say that's caused challenges in Canada and challenges around the world. A huge portion of our economy is tied to the American economy. And so we've had to focus tremendously on that relationship. And I think Chrystia Freeland has done a terrific job at standing up to Mr. Trump, doing it respectfully, but doing it persistently, with courage, with facts, with expert advice, and doing it in a really a multi-partisan way as we renegotiated NAFTA, but not only NAFTA, things like tariffs on steel and aluminum and other issues. That has dominated our foreign policy agenda. Well, that's gone on. We've had issues with China, we've had issues with Russia and Ukraine, Crimea, we have tensions around Iran and in the Middle East. In the Gulf states, there are tensions. All of those, I think Canada is playing a modest but a constructive role. With respect to Iran, that is certainly an issue that your viewers care about. We have persistently tried to do two things. We've tried to stand up to the regime that doesn't honor human rights and has supported terrorist organizations around the world, has got tensions with Israel, and complicated foreign relationships. So we're very much prepared to stand up to the regime while trying to always help both Canadians of Iranian background, Persian Canadians and others from Iran, as well as trying to build that relationship. Now, we have detained Canadians in Iran. We've had Canadians who lost their lives in Iran. So we don't take that lightly. We will stand up for either dual citizens or Canadians who are in Iran. We're trying to find ways always to help Iranian Canadians with their business relationships, with their family relationships. It's not easy. We did, and I'm going to be very blunt, we did promise to reopen the embassy 4 years ago. I'm disappointed we've not been able to do that. There are a number of steps that have to happen, including a welcome from Iran to open an embassy. We're not there yet. I will continue, as my colleagues Ali Assassi and Majid Jahari have been working on this issue very hard. I will continue to work on it as well, because all Canadians need to be able to do business around the world, and one place they're going to do that is Iran. And it's a little tricky as we stand up to the regime and say there's certain things that are unacceptable on a world level, but also stand with the Iranian people who we want to help.
On the Iranian issue that you mentioned, as you said, Prime Minister Trudeau promised re-engagement and reopening of the embassies, but then last June, I believe it was June of 2018, in the House of Commons, the Liberals, including Prime Minister Trudeau himself, voted for an opposition motion which called for basically halting all negotiations with Iran with respect to re-engagement. From Iranian side, their official statements is that they are interested to re-engage with the Canadian government, and so they have basically welcomed that news when the Canadian government said that they want to re-engage. They welcomed that news as well. So why the Liberals? And you are now saying that the Liberals are still committed to diplomacy with Iran. If that is a commitment, why the Liberals stood up and voted for the conservative motion? Well, that's a question that many people in our community ask.
We signed on and we're part of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And we still are part of that. And that holds Iran to certain levels of account. However, we have grave concerns about ballistic missiles, their nuclear program, their vilification of Israel. And there are things that one can say we want re-engagement as they have, but we still are expecting certain standards of international practice. And so we're not done yet. To engage is a complex process. We are open, but we will not just simply say that all activities are okay. So we're doing that. The Prime Minister has, I think, repeatedly called on Iran to honor its international commitments, to ensure that Canadians are not held in detention, and that we have respect for its neighbors, including Israel. And so those are also on the table. So it's a process where our doors are open for conversation, but we will also ensure that Canadian values and Canadian international standards are maintained.
But you are basically saying that a future, if elected, the Liberal government still will be committed to taking step towards diplomacy and re-engagement with Iran. Is that correct?
We are always open to doing that, but we are also expecting Iran to stand up to international standards.
Mm-hmm. With respect to international standards, and then I'll move to my question about the environment. If you look at the same region, you mentioned Persian Gulf regions. For example, there are countries like Saudi Arabia that have one of the worst human rights records in the world. Jamal Khashoggi, we just passed the first year anniversary of his murder in the Saudi consulate in Turkey. So there are many countries and others, China, there are different countries that do not respect human rights. But Canada basically has diplomatic relationships with them. Don't you think there is this double standard? Many in our community, for example, and in other communities, in other diverse communities across Canada, believe this as well, that there is a double standard in the Canadian foreign policy. Do you agree with that?
I don't think there's a double standard. Every country has a unique relationship with Canada. Every country we examine in it. The Minister of Foreign Affairs, Chrystia Freeland, was very clear and made very strong statements when Canada disagreed with Saudi Arabia. And we were criticized by many countries for such a strong statement. After the Khashoggi murder in Turkey, which has obviously been done and sanctioned by Saudi officials, many other countries recognize that Canada's original statements were very clear and very appropriate, and perhaps earlier. We were early adopters to understand that we do that. We have engaged with each country in the world based on our standards and based on our history. Canada, to be very clear, Canada does not sell arms to Saudi Arabia. Canadian companies do. Canadian companies have contractual agreements.
The government of Canada signs off on those.
The former government signed off on them. We have not changed them. The Harper government did. We now have a process in place for the first time under the Liberal government where those have to be reviewed in a different way. And we have yet to agree to a new sale. So we will engage in every new contract and ensure that they satisfy our desire for human rights.
And that's a new bill
that is a new bill that was passed. A new bill that was passed by our Parliament, and we recognize that for Canada to have legitimacy in the world, a new government can't come in and simply undo contracts that were done in previous governments, or all our companies and all our relationships are vulnerable and at risk. That doesn't mean we like what happened, but we also understand that Canada absolutely has to be trusted in the world. But when we became the government, we enacted, as you say, a new process whereby we will review every one of those permits and ensure that they meet Canadian standards. And that's what a good government does, and that's what we'll continue to do. We obviously have concerns about any regime that doesn't honor the rights of women, that doesn't honor its international obligations, that doesn't build peace, that isn't about security. So we will always stand up in that way.
Let's move to issues of environment and environment policies and climate change. Some are critical of the Liberal government. They say that the government did not do enough to implement policies that can fight climate change. There are others who are critical of the government, saying that they have taken extreme measures towards that goal. Tell us a bit about the program, what has been implemented and what is coming in future if the Liberals are re-elected.
And essentially, when I'm knocking on doors in Don Valley West, I hear both those. I hear that we've not gone far enough. I've heard we've gone too far. I've heard we should be building half a dozen pipelines. I've heard we should be building none. What we recognize is that Canada has an economy that has carbon at its core. We know that. We have a petroleum economy out west particularly. And I drove to work today. Now I did drive in a hybrid car, but I still use gasoline. And most Canadians are still doing that. So we're recognizing that we're in a transition. What I think the Conservatives fail to recognize is that this is a climate emergency. They simply do not understand, and they do not believe the science, and they do not want to take the actions which will put people in a situation where their attitudes are changing and their behaviors are changing. And we're trying to do that. We signed on to the Paris targets. We're also trying to do better than that. And so we're looking for a net zero by 2050, but with 5-year benchmarks all the way through, which will be legally binding to make sure we're getting there. We'll engage scientists in a rigorous way to make sure that we are at the forefront of science, knowledge, and the understanding. We put a price on pollution. And in provinces that didn't have their own price on pollution, we've done that. We're trying to ease the burden of that, particularly on lower income people, with the climate incentive plan, the climate action plan, that incentivizes people to reduce their carbon footprint, to reduce their consumption of electricity. At the same time, it's trying to get it into the minds of Canadians that this needs to be a national project. This needs to engage every single citizen in every way. Of course, companies have their responsibility, but we want to engage every citizen through putting a price on pollution. We're going to be banning single-use plastics. I was in Rwanda in March. They banned plastic bags and single-use plastics 10 years ago. If Rwanda can do that, Canada can do it, and we can do it better. While we're doing that, we're ensuring that people whose livelihoods are tied to those industries have every opportunity to transition to the clean green economy. We'll be looking at all kinds of transition plans. We've announced 2 or 3 of them in this platform. We have to do more. And it's absolutely essential that Canada does it for the health of Canadians. We're already seeing health impacts of climate change, but also for the world, that Canada is an emitter. I would absolutely agree we've not done enough in 4 years. We have taken significant steps, not enough. We need 4 more years, maybe 8 more years, maybe 12 more years, however Canadians decide they want us to govern, to make a huge difference. I'm hearing it at the door. I'm hearing it not only from young people. I was at a march, the Climate Change March last Friday. It wasn't just young people. It was a lot of youth, but it was a lot of older people too. Older Canadians are understanding that this is something, that the very sustainability of our planet is at stake, and Canada has to regain its national presence on this issue. This should not be a partisan issue. This should not be. And you look back over the history, the recent history of Canada, and Brian Mulroney, a progressive conservative, was a very environmentally aware prime minister. The conservatives should be engaged in this just as much as we are. Of course, the Greens are pushing us further. We get that. Liberals have always been very good at stealing good ideas from other parties. We'll steal the best ideas from the New Democrats, the best ideas from the Green Party. But we're the ones, we're the government, we're the party that is most likely to form the government, and we're the ones who are going to be able to put it into action. And so if people want to make a climate change difference, they should be voting for their Liberal candidate.
Rob Oliphant, thanks for the time and opportunity. Good luck with your campaign.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.